my name's Ian, welcome back to my channel, and welcome to this slightly different review that we've been doing. In the Muffin Review series we've been mainly dealing with older games and older editions of games, but this time out, slight cheat, but we're going to be reviewing a new product that's just come out, a new book for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, so new edition of the game, relatively, 2014. And a new release of the game, relatively, kind of based on a 1981 module. One of the things that Goodman Games has been doing over the last few years has been taking older modules, some of the classics from Basic Dungeons & Dragons and Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and producing a sort of homage, what do they call it? Homage and 5th edition conversions of. Which is true. They've all got, these volumes have got reproductions of the original modules in there. They've also got some introductory stuff and some blurb sometimes by the people that were involved in them, mostly by the authors of the books, of the new books themselves, so their connection with the adventures. From acquiring books from my dad's bookshelf when I was a kid, through the forays of various authors since then, I've always garnered a love for pulp fantasy and weird fiction, weird fantasy and science fiction. This goes through the authors such as Robert E. Howard, it's Conan, and Fritz Leiber from Far and Grey Mouse of fame, through to H.P. Lovecraft, and of course the sort of semi-subject of our review today, Clark Ashton Smith, and that's where we get to our the book that we're going to be reviewing today. Back in 1981, Thomas Moldvay produced Dungeon Module X2, the Castle Amber, part of which is a love letter to Clark Ashton Smith and his fantasy tales of Averoigne. And Goodman Games have come up with their volume 5 of their original Adventures Reincarnated, which is Castle Amber. Contains the original module in full inside its pages, plus a 5th edition conversion of it. The original Castle Amber was released for the BX edition, the old Red Book and Blue Book edition of Dungeons & Dragons in 1981. Written by Thomas Moldvay, as I said, it was the second in the Expert series, the X series, the first being the Isle of Dread, which has also been received the Goodman treatment. The Expert series expanded the core concepts of the game, introducing higher levels of play and more complicated things for both the Dungeon Masters and the players to handle. More powerful monsters, more difficult situations to get their head around, and so on. Castle Amber included all of these different elements and was a challenging adventure to both play and to referee. It was also a lot of fun, filled with strange, eccentric non-player characters for the players to interact with. It's labelled today under the banner of what people call a funhouse dungeon. The idea behind a funhouse dungeon is it's a collection of rooms, monsters, tricks, puzzles, whatever, that don't necessarily have to make sense and don't necessarily have to make some ecological logic or whatever. But I'm not sure that's a fair assessment of the module. Probably the setting of the module itself, it lends itself to the idea that the thing is a crazy patchwork of all sorts of things that doesn't have to make logical sense. So while some of the early modules were funhouse dungeons in that definition, and did indeed make little logical sense and weren't really coherent, just sort of random stocking of monsters here and puzzles over there, and just a challenge for the players to get through rather than trying to make sense. In the context of Castle Amber and its inhabitants, it does make sense why there are some really crazy rooms in there. In addition to the original module, about a decade and a half after that, in the mid-90s, the Dungeons and Dragons world of Mystara, it used to be called the Known World and then developed into the world of Mystara, was ported over into the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons line. And with it, they released a number of, I would say, introductory things. Mystara in those days, in that period, in that sort of mid-90s period, or early to mid-90s, served as an introductory campaign setting for dungeon masters and players to get their heads around. It came up with some novel concepts like adventures that came in boxes with a number of player handouts already there, and audio CDs with sound effects for various parts, a conversation of NPCs and sounds of monsters fighting and that side of thing. And I think what those help to do is to illustrate to new dungeon masters how they might go around adding personality into the conversation of characters. And Castle Amber was one of the things that got drawn into that with an adventure called Mark of Amber. It wasn't the same as Castle Amber. In essence, it was a sequel to Castle Amber. But one of the important things about the Mark of Amber that we can see in Goodman's treatment of it is that the adventure there, the authors of Mark of Amber did do things like expand the castle out, that expanded description of it, and more importantly, gave further depth to the Amber family, their personalities and their relationships. So it's something that the Goodman book does delve into in its conversion. It brings a lot of that material over and explores the Amber family to a fair more depth than the original module did, which is to the betterment. So before we delve into Goodman's release, then I must issue a spoiler warning. So if you are going to be a player in this, then please just switch off and wait until after you've played to come back and compare notes. So basically, the original X2 dealt with the characters being stranded within a mysterious manor surrounded by some strange mists, which might sound familiar. It had been ripped from time and space, and the characters had to explore the manor itself, find out what the heck was going on, discover that it was under some curse, go off and travel elsewhere to see if they could find a resolution to the curse, break the curse, and get home. Now that's the whole plot of the module in summary. What actually happens under the lid of that is a heck of a lot more. So along the way, the characters get to encounter various members of the Amber family who own the castle. Now these guys they range from eccentric to utterly insane. They are interesting personalities in themselves, and if the players were of more of a think things through and talk first, attack later or whatever, then they could get a lot out of the game. The adventure is very rich in its in the strange personalities that it describes. As they piece together the story of the Amber family and what's going on, they get to travel to Averoigne, which is a fantasy version of a French province. Now, Averoigne is where the connection to Clark Ashton Smith comes in. He did a series of short stories set in Averoigne at various points in Averoigne's timeline in its history, and they are, I think they form one of the staples of weird fiction today. I mean, Averoigne is still, probably actually thanks to Castle Amber re-dredging that water in a similar way to Call of Cthulhu came about and reignited interest in H.P. Lovecraft's work, and the Conan comics from Marvel reignited people's interest in Robert E. Howard's work. I think the Module X2 and its bibliography of the Clark Ashton Smith stories that it's partly based on reignited some interest in Clark Ashton Smith. Not to the same levels as H.P. Lovecraft and Howard. And I can almost bet that a fair few of the people that end up watching this video would probably never heard of Clark Ashton Smith. And to those people I say, do yourself a favour, go and track him down, his works, and give them a read. Some pretty interesting ideas and thoughts there. And Clark Ashton Smith was a contemporary of Howard and H.P. Lovecraft, and part of that circle of people that exchanged ideas. So you will find, if you're familiar with Lovecraft, you will find some elements of that within with Clark Ashton Smith's works. Similarly, you will find Clark Ashton Smith writing directly about the Lovecraftian mythos, where you end up with figures such as Sothagua and so on, who are now firmly part of that mythos, and you'll find them in the Call of Cthulhu game and so on. And they were invented by Clark Ashton Smith. So there was this cabal of authors that were corresponding and exchanging ideas, and they ended up with elements of each other's ideas scattered within each other's works. So it's quite an interesting period of time. The name Averoigne probably comes from the department of Aveyron, which is in the south of France. However, the way that Clark Ashton Smith describes the terrain of Averoigne, the layout of Averoigne, it's a better fit for the province of Auvergne, which is just to the north of Aveyron. And then in terms of that, if you correlate the two together, if you kind of take a look at the concepts that were introduced into Averoigne and where all the general lay of the land as it was described in Clark Ashton Smith's works and others, with real world Auvergne, then you kind of start to see parallels. So for example, the capital city of the province of Averoigne, which is Vaillant, almost has a correlation to the capital city of Auvergne, which is Clermont-Ferrand. So if you go to the short story The Colossus of Yulon, then, or Yulone, or however you want to pronounce it, I'll show you a picture of the cathedral of Clermont-Ferrand, and if you're familiar with the story, then maybe you could see the scene of Gaspard du Nord on the side of the cathedral facing down the Colossus, and the edifice that is the cathedral in real life really does evoke some imagery when you compare it to the story. So our intrepid explorers end up in Averoigne, where it turns out that the Amber family originally came from, in the context of the module. The Amber family were invented by Moldvay and not by Smith. So they had to run away. Averoigne is very much an anti-magic, anti-black magic, anti-sorcery kind of place, steeped in religious trappings, very much a Inquisition-led type area. So under the auspices of this, the Amber family had to flee, and they did so through magical gates and ended up in the known world, in Mystara, so to speak. And then from there, a curse was laid upon them, where they found their mansion stuck in these mists for an indeterminate amount of time. Their time in isolation has made what was already an eccentric family positively nuts. So while in Averoigne, they are tasked with finding certain items that connect back into Smith's stories. It's interesting that the magical items that they have to collect, or the artifacts that they have to collect, are described by Smith and do come into some of the stories that they're in. So you can actually use the stories that Smith wrote as source material for fleshing out the adventures, and we'll come to reason why fleshing them out is important in a second, or is needed in a second. So they'll find these artifacts, and they use the artifacts to produce a ritual that will summon the tomb of another family member, Stephen Amber, and therein they enter the tomb, discover the way to break the curse, end the curse, and find themselves back home. So there are 3 distinct parts to the adventure themselves. There's the exploration of the mansion, even though that sort of takes up, it's separated between the various parts of the mansion itself and its dungeons. Then there is the quests to find these artifacts within the province of Averoigne, and then there is the final exploration of the tomb of Stephen Amber, during which they'll culminate in finding the way to break the curse and end all of that side of things, and hey presto, adventure done. So it really is, those are the 3 main building blocks of the adventure. So just to flip back to Averoigne and why it needed fleshing out. So in the original adventure, the whole Averoigne episode was given 3 pages, and each of the artifacts within, or the quests to find the artifacts, only a paragraph or a handful of paragraphs in order for the DM to go and inject some more into that, which you could do. I mean, you could go to Smith's original works, or you could just invent it on your own and what have you, or come up with something reasonable as to why these things would go. And they could spend as much or as little time in Averoigne as you wished. But the important thing was that the actual scenarios that the characters had to undergo in order to retrieve the items that they needed were not fleshed out to any great depth in the original X2. So there was an element of work for the Dungeon Master to do there. So that's pretty much it. The players find themselves in the Castle Amber. They have to wander around Castle Amber, find their way to Averoigne, find the artifacts in Averoigne, do that, summon the tomb, go to the tomb, break the curse, job done. Now, the original, if played straight off the page, in my opinion, doesn't work. Now, in at least, it doesn't provide as a satisfying scenario as it could have done. To do this, like I said, you need to put some effort into Averoigne, but you also need to put some effort into the castle and make the castle live. If you just treat it as a series of encounters, the players go to this room, do this, next room, do this, next room, do, then it just becomes a boring dungeon hack through this overly large mansion. So to make it work, you need to put some effort into bringing the personalities of the Amber family and giving them some interaction with each other. There are elements within the module that explain why the various Amber family members wouldn't particularly move from their own areas, but that's not to say that they can't, and that's not to say that you can't make the adventure more interesting by having them move around and by having some level of interaction, making the place live and breathe. But also beyond that, like I said about the Averoigne, you really do need to do some work on Averoigne, and that's where I got my fascination with this module from. That's where I poured a lot of creative energy into bringing that. For one thing, I love the Clark Ashton Smith stories of Averoigne, and so to bring those in and to bring that element in and to actually make it into a campaign setting in itself, a little mini sort of area where the players would run around and they spent a long time there. And there's no reason. I mean, there's no reason why they can't. The place is large enough to encompass all sorts of little side quests and other adventures and anything that you want to put into there as they go around. They've got the main quest line, which is the retrieval of these objects so they can eventually get home. But there's no reason why you can't put all sorts of other things in there as well. And we'll discuss some ideas for that in a couple of minutes. There's some all sorts of interesting things that you can kind of do, and I think some of the difficulties they had, the parties that I ran through it were trying to find money that would actually work there, learning the language, something we'll also discuss in a second, and there was something to do with drow underwear. That the less said of that, probably the better. The main thing that I was hoping for when Goodman announced that Volume 5 of the original Adventures Reincarnated was going to be Castle Amber was exactly this. So more fleshing out of the Amber family and the way that the mansion worked as a social element, if you like, and more effort being put in to the Averoyne side of things, instead of the sort of 3 or 4 pages that were given over in the original adventure. And let's face it, from the original, which I think is a 32 page module, to the quite very much larger couple of 100 pages or so, they have got plenty of room to do that, even after reprinting the original adventure in the front of it. So they're the 2 main things that I wanted out of this book. So when it eventually came out and I read through it, I was almost in equal measures delighted and disappointed. So let's kind of explore both of those sides. So as we mentioned, the Goodman Games release of Castle Amber in its original reincarnation clocks in at 268 pages, and as per all of the rest of the volumes of this, the first section is given over to musings from various luminaries of one stripe or another about their experiences with Castle Amber and their thoughts on it. They're always interesting, sometimes a little bit gushing, but they're always make an interesting read, just from the sort of shared experience point of view. You know, this is a module I grew up on, so reading the insights into it, particularly people that seem to be roughly the same age as me, as they did the same. I rumbled their way through the adventure and making their own little tweaks and expansions to it. It's quite interesting to see how their games went as well. It's just one of those shared experience type things that's nice to have every now and again. Then follows a reprint of the original adventure in full. Now, some of the reincarnated books have reprinted several versions of the adventures that they cover. This is generally because there were several printings that are different in one way or another. And so what Goodman are trying to do is to produce an archive that will stand as a historical testament to those particular adventures that they are dealing with. In Castle Amber's case, there were only 2 printings of it, and the differences between the 2 printings were really, really minor. So in this case, there's only 1 reprint of Castle Amber in there, only 1 copy of the original module inside the Goodman volume, which means it's all to the better, because most of the space of the book itself is given over to the reimagination, to the homage conversion, whatever you want to call it. Now, one thing Goodman has been good at when it's been doing these conversions is expanding the material that's from the original and pushing it in all sorts of different directions. They did this with the Lost City. There's some fantastic additions in there. They did it with the Isle of Dread, and they did it with the Borderlands, Keep on the Borderlands conversion that they did. In this regard, the Castle Amber doesn't disappoint in a way. They certainly do expand quite a fair bit on the original module. So in the case of Averoyne, for example, the section of Averoyne is expanded to 30 pages instead of 3. So that's got to be a good sign, right? So what I was hoping for, and when I saw this, and you see the index and where all the page counts are, and go on, you sort of think, well, okay, this has got to be something. We'll explore it and see if it matches up to my expectations. The unfortunate answer is yes and no. To kind of delve into a bit where I think that, let's go back and deal with the sections in order, rather than jumping straight into Averoyne. So chapters 4 through 8 of the incarnation, the new incarnation, describe the castle, as you would expect, and they're split up pretty much in the same way as the castle in the original module. So you've got the wings, the indoor garden, you've got the chapel and the dungeon. The conversions are pretty much beat for beat as they are in the original module. There's some monster tweaks and encounter tweaks and bits and pieces here and there, as you would expect from a conversion over to a different rules set. However, what they have done is added in upper stories to both the east and the west wings of the castle. Now, this might be a testament to, or a callback to the way that the castle was expanded a little in Mark of Amber, where additional floors were added to these wings. But in the context of this particular adventure, they expand both the amount of rooms and space within the castle side of the adventure itself, to no real benefit. It doesn't really push. There's not much in there that pushes the story forward or the exploration. It just gives the players more space in which to become frustrated with as they find yet more rooms that don't actually forward anything forward and don't actually push anything towards their goals. The best you can say is that at least the bedrooms of some of the more notable Amber family members that didn't have residences before in the original now do have residences, because they've been added in these additional floors. But I feel you could label the entire, grief knows how many rooms on those two additional floors, as just being more of the same rather than anything that truly adds anything of great worth to the adventure. And there's 25 pages that deal with these additional parts of the wings themselves, and they run the danger when players are exploring the castle. I find that the castle itself is big enough to keep them interested and wanting to push forward and explore. With these additional wings, I think it starts running the line between something that is interesting and different to explore and something that is so big that it becomes just boring. Lots more of nothing very special. Additionally, the side view that was given, also sort of produced in the original adventure, gave a side view which showed you the location of the various wings, and a nice little sort of side-on view and the depth of the dungeon beneath the place. That side view is on page 116 if you want to look it up, of the original adventure Reincarnated book. It doesn't include these upper stories to these wings at all, so it still shows them as one story elements to them. And given that the roofs for the central, all the central domes of the indoor garden are shown and so on, I don't think it's like an omission on purpose to show any detail or anything like that. So those additional wings, I don't know why they're there. I don't know what possessed, whether it is just picking up on the fact that there were multiple stories in the Mark of Amber story, Mark of Amber adventure. But in that case, the Mark of Amber adventure also added attics to each of the wings too, which aren't present in this adventure. So it goes halfway and just adds a whole bunch of 25 pages of nothing, I think, in my opinion. With respect to the original room conversions, these are the rooms that are in the original and in the Reincarnated edition. These are very well done. 5e lends itself to picking on old adventures, and in fact it was part of the point of the playtest, and during playtest of 5e we were given just conversion sheets of old adventures and copies of those adventures, whether we had them or what, and told to go and run this old adventure using this conversion sheet and see how it goes. Part of 5e, part of the point of 5e was to allow virtually any adventure from any previous edition of Dungeons and Dragons to be used, or any material that you wanted, with a minimal amount. And a lot of the times you can pick up any adventure and run it on the fly using the 5e rules, doing the conversions on the fly, because at base 5e is very logical, is very it is logical and simple enough and intuitive enough to be able to do that. Unlike third edition, which was very mechanistic, there's a lot of different things had to balance out. So if you're converting something from, say, basic Dungeons and Dragons over into third edition, there was a lot more work to be done. But with fifth edition, certainly you could take a basic Dungeons and Dragons or an advanced Dungeons and Dragons or a second edition module or whatever you wanted, and run it just using the core books. So I think that's one of the reasons why these Reincarnated adventures work. The fifth edition lends itself to these kind of conversions, and the Goodman have done a really good job on the Castle Amber conversion and on the other conversion books that it's done too. So the fact that the rooms and the Amber family stats and the way that the original encounters from the old module have been brought into fifth edition, the fact that they've been really well treated is not surprising. It's kind of par for the course, or par excellence for the course that I expect out of these Goodman books. They have taken the time as well to flesh things out a little bit, put little tweaks here and there, and that make some of those encounters a lot more satisfying to run too. So it's nice. Some of the encounters have been lifted straight off the page from the original one, and that's no bad thing. But some of them they've actually put some nice effort into putting some gloss on there and really making sense of some of the encounters that didn't particularly make any sense in the start, and adding details in that really do make them shine. A good bit of polish there. There is an issue I have with presentation, and I'll show you this because it's somewhat annoying. So the presentation of the castle map itself comes on a gatefold, which you can see, and unfortunately within the gatefold, you can see here the actual descriptions of the room description comes on the gatefold insert, and also continues on the gatefold inserts onto the other side. Now that is a little bit of a pain, and I think I would have preferred, since they've added these maps in for the upper stories of Castle Amber, I think those upper story maps that are on page 72 would have been better on that third panel of the gatefold, just to ensure that then all of the pages of the actual module itself, or the room descriptions, followed on. You've got this glossy insert which is just the maps, and then continue on from there. The fact that you have to open out a gatefold and the adventure description continues on here on the very edge of the gatefold that's just annoying, and it could have been easily avoided. Right, so that's the castle and my thoughts on the castle. And remember that we've got 20 odd pages in hand that I think aren't necessary and should not have really been added in. So given that we've got 25 pages, let's see how they've done with the additional 30 pages that they've given over to Averoigne, and see whether those 25 pages could have been better used. So they have expanded Averoigne a fair bit. They have gone back to Clark Ashton Smith's works and built in a lot of aspects from the books. Now, this is sort of what a lot of DMs did in the original running when we ran these things eventually in the original things. You go back, you've got statistics for various characters like Gaspard de Nord, you've got the original stories, you've got these quests for various magical items that are tied into those original stories. So you go back to the original stories and use the framework of those stories to give narrative to that part of the quest that you're doing there. And that's kind of exactly what the expansion to the Averoigne, to those quests within Averoigne that the authors have given to this. The Clark Ashton Smith stories cover quite a large period of time within Averoigne, but the Reincarnated adventure has done exactly what the original adventure did, which is to compress all of those down into the medieval period. All of the stories that it draws inspiration from have now been reset in the medieval period of France, and that's no bad thing, I think. you could, if you wanted to, make things more complicated by putting them in their own line and involving a lot more time travel. There is time travel involved in the adventure as it is, and you could extend that time travelling aspect out to have the characters move back and forwards in time trying to find these artifacts. But I think that's an unnecessary complication, and compressing them down into one period of time, that works. It worked in the original, and it also works for the reincarnated version. Now, many of the protagonists and the antagonists from Smith's works are brought over, just like it were in the original. But they've been given a lot more detail and fleshed out a bit than they were. They were given statistics and a paragraph in the original adventure, and now some of them have been given a nice chunk of detail to work with for the Dungeon Master to be able to bring them to life. So while much of the material within the Goodman edition of this has been expanded from Moldvay's basic summaries on these 3 pages within the original X2, I do feel that the section regarding Averoigne is still lacking. The map has basically been lifted directly from the original module, and that map has inconsistencies with Clark Ashton Smith's works, and partly because one of the things, the time compression that they brought in, that the map is based on the Castle Amber module's description of Averoigne rather than Clark Ashton Smith's description of Averoigne, and so a bit of that the element of the description from Clark Ashton Smith being brought into the map would have been nice. I've always had problems with the map of Averoigne as it's depicted there. So one of the things that I did when I ran it, which was expand it out into a sort of mini campaign setting for the player characters to stumble their way through. They haven't done that here. What they've done is to expand on the material that was in the original, to flesh out the adventures, the direct adventures to picking up the various artifacts. They've taken what was in the original module and they've expanded those out in good ways. And so the expansions they've done is good, but I don't think it goes far enough. I would have liked, like I said at the head of this, the Averoigne section to be extensive, or more extensive than it is. It didn't have to be overblown, but more in keeping with actually providing the material and guidance and descriptions and so on for allowing the players to spend an extended period of time in the province as they hunt these artifacts down. There's a lot of ground for them to cover and a lot of scope within that province for them to deal with, and just sort of taking the direct line of the quests for the artifacts and not really going further outside that line, I think is somewhat lacking. Those 25 pages of additional floors to the mansion could have been added in here into fleshing out Averoigne in a fair direction. Especially I think all of Clark Ashton Smith's works now are in the public domain, so I don't think there would have been any copyright issues in them heading more into his works to bring more meat to the bone there. Additionally, two of the settlements, including Vaillant and Pérégon, have been transposed in and mapped out, and that's nice. But there's not many settlements that are depicted on that map, and I don't think there's any reason why the rest of them couldn't be. You've only got about 6, 7 settlements or something like that could have been just briefly summarised, a bit of a map and a key and a brief description, and I think that would have helped DMs bring the setting to life and guide them through. And if you're talking about a page for each of those, you're only just making a dent into those additional superfluous 25 pages of empty room descriptions. I also think that the alienness of Averoigne as a province, especially to characters that have come from a sort of pseudo-fantasy medieval world where wizards hurl fireballs down the throats of blue dragons on a regular basis, is kind of overlooked a little bit. There's the descriptions of it that have been, again, largely transposed from the original, where they describe the it's largely anti-magic, and throwing too much magic around is likely to get them into trouble with the officials and the church and all of that kind of thing. But it does sort of skip over some things, like, for example, French is the language that is spoken in Averoigne. But mystically, that's just dusted under the carpet by saying, oh well, they magically get to be able to understand and speak French as they pass through the portal that gets them there. What I think is a bit more interesting is if you land them into a space where they don't know the language, they don't know the layout, they don't know where they are. They know they've travelled through some magical portal in order to get there, but they've basically got no clue. So finding their way through to understanding the language, particularly if they have to do some secretive spell casting of comprehend languages or something similar, I think that adds to this. It adds to the alienness of the situation that they find themselves in, rather than just going, oh, yeah, they speak French here, but yeah, so the characters now, because they've magically been bestowed that. That doesn't provide an illustration of the alienness of the situation, and it doesn't challenge the players and make them think about where they are and how they're even going to start doing what they're going to be doing. And there's elements from the books as well, from Clark Ashton Smith's works. For example, they brought in elements from the Mother of Toads, but you could have also added in some demonic cults worshipping Sathogua, or the fortresses of necromancers like Nether and that kind of thing. And Averoigne is quite a dark place when you read the books, and there are some H.P. Lovecraft overtones there. Like I said, these authors talk to each other, and they could have been brought in. The way that it's depicted, I think, is too whimsical. Now, interestingly, the book does mention that Averoigne may make the basis for a fair domain of dread in terms of the Ravenloft campaign setting, and I think that's well founded. I think that's a fair route to consider. I do believe that if you want to go down the Ravenloft route, I think the mansion is a better sort of mini domain, Isle of Dread, than actually making Averoigne the domain. In which way you could select one of the Amber family members as being the Dread Lord and having some additional connections in there. It would certainly explain the fact that the mansion is surrounded by mists, which could easily be transported or translated into the concept of the mists from the Ravenloft adventures. But that also brings into what I was kind of hinting at earlier in bringing other elements into the Averoigne adventures that you could build upon. And one of the ways that you can build adventures into something more expansive than the material that is printed for the adventure itself is to pick up other adventures that sort of seem to be along the same lines, or at least compatible with them, and bring them in and have the characters play through those adventures while they're playing through the framework provided by another adventure. And I think in terms of the Averoigne side of things, then, and especially if you're connecting it in any way to Ravenloft, but unnecessary, you can remove elements of Ravenloft from many of the Ravenloft adventures. But the Feast of Goblins, RA1, I think that fits in quite well. Averoigne, in Ashton Smith's works and in the way that some of it is depicted in the Castle Amber module, has quite a fair werewolf infestation. And the Feast of Goblins module, I think that ties in well with that concept of things. So transporting or connecting up some of the lines of familiarity between the Feast of Goblins module and the concept of Averoigne, and having the Feast of Goblins thing, because there's nothing, you don't know what's beyond the borders of Averoigne in itself. So all of the Goblin army being generated within Feast of Goblins coming in and whatever, that could easily be built in. You could have Averoigne as Cascas, for example, and everything else going on around it. And I also think that the descriptions of the lands and the cities misses a trick. When when you if you consider the connection to between Averoigne and Auvergne, and the connection between like Clermont-Ferrand and Vaillant, for example, there's a whole wealth of information, historical information and geographical information, and the layout of cities and that side of things, that can be gleaned from just wandering around on the internet, or picking up an Auvergne tourist guide or something like that. Elements that could have been brought into the adventure and the description of Averoigne. Vaillant, like I said, for example, the description of that and the encounter with the Colossus and Gaspard du Nord, the description of the cathedral in Vaillant is quite bland, just some grey church-like building, compared to the black brooding edifice that stands and looms over the rest of the city in real world Clermont-Ferrand. So I think the real cathedral in the real city works far better and is far more atmospheric than the one that has been constructed to use in the adventure. And if you are running an adventure, I would sincerely consider to go and have a look and just do a bit of a research into Clermont-Ferrand and its cathedral, and see if you can make a better description or a more atmospheric description of what the adventure puts into that episode. Additionally, the geography of Auvergne is a heck of a lot more interesting than the sort of flat forest that's shown on the Averoigne map in both the Reincarnated version and the original adventure. Just putting some contours on there and adding in some of the finer details in the mountains and so on, I think that would have been very evocative. Having them travel through this werewolf infested, heavily forested, valleyed, mountained, interesting slice of south central France geography would have made things a bit more atmospheric, and I don't think it would have taken much effort to make the map more interesting, to show these things, and to make the description of Averoigne more interesting to describe these things. So again, I think failing to reference back to Auvergne and take some inspiration there, and use that inspiration to extend the basic descriptions of Averoigne from both Smith and from the adventure, I think that's a trick missed. So from Averoigne, the quest is identical. They collect the items that they need to go and perform the ritual to summon Stephen Amber's tomb, and the tomb itself is pretty straightforward. It is a small dungeon hack, and at the centre of which they find Stephen's tomb and break the curse. So I don't think there's much to be said there. There's not really much in the way of expansion to go on there. Again, they've done exactly what they needed to do there. Convert the tomb over to 5th edition to be usable there. Tweak where necessary. Add some spit and polish, and job done. So I've really got nothing bad or good to say about there. Well, good actually. I mean, it's as expected, and what's expected is a good job, and that's exactly what they've done with the tomb section, and it's exactly what they've done with the module as a whole. What I'm really griping about here is things that seem logical to me in a way that the adventure should have been extended and the material should have been extended, versus the elements of the adventure that were extended that I feel that don't particularly add anything interesting. So the final section of the book, that goes into the various personalities, non-player characters and so on, new magical items, new monsters. Many of the items and monsters are conversions of ones from Dungeons and Dragons and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. All very well done, and as can be expected, each of the each of the volumes, the 5 volumes so far, has done a fair job. I think it's interesting to note the number of pages that 5th edition does seem to require to provide statistics for things. You know, gone are the days where you could put half a dozen monsters on one page, but you know, these are the times we live in. And the final appendix does flesh out another part of the manor itself, the castle itself, that wasn't touched on in the original, but in this instance I think it adds to the adventure. It deals with a description of a building within the indoor forest that the players won't necessarily come across unless they go off the beaten path, and I think that's good. It's a sort of reward in some ways for players that do step off the path and go and do a bit more of an explore. In other ways, it adds, I think, some much needed information to one of the most complex characters that inhabits the castle. So I think that's an example, more so than the addition of floors to the wings. I think the additional floors of the wings is unnecessary expansion, whereas this additional element to the indoor forest is good and is welcome. And I think this is it's food for thought in that direction about, you know, are you adding things in that enhance, or are you adding things in that just fill up pages? And certainly the hunting lodge elements in the appendix at the back, that adds something that's interesting. It's not just filler. To summarise, and I'm going to add the caveat here that more so than any of the ones that they've done so far, but Castle Amber is one of those that has a special place for me. So I'm going to add the caveat to my review to say that I had a lot of expectations of this adventure, of Goodman's release of it, and I don't think it met my expectations. So while I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5, that 3 out of 5 is against the expectations I had for a conversion and redo of Castle Amber. If you want to go and put it into context of, you know, take away my expectations and go and look at it, it is just as good as all of the other adventures that they've done so far in this original Adventures Reincarnated thing. So my 3 out of 5 is, I was expecting a lot from this book, on which it only partially delivered. It could have been so much more had they stripped away those, in my opinion, 25 unnecessary pages of pointless rooms, and poured more effort into the Averoin section, and did some good work there, which they're perfectly capable of. Goodman are a good producer of some strong material. But on the whole, I think well, the material that is actually presented there, I certainly think that the next time I do end up running Castle Amber, and no doubt there will be another time, I've run it a number of times over the years, I'll be reaching for Original Adventures Reincarnated Volume 5 Castle Amber when I do get to run it over the original module themselves. And some of the ideas and tweaks and things that it's made will certainly replace some of the copious notes that I've made for the adventure over time. There's some nice ideas in there that are a lot better than some of the ones that I've come up with. And I think that's just the way things go. It's I think role-playing as an imaginative and creative exercise is a lot about sharing each other's ideas and mixing and matching as suits your own style of play and your own brain and the brains of those sitting around the table in front of you. So that's my review of Original Adventures Reincarnated Volume 5 Castle Amber. So if you'd like me to review the other volumes in the series, then comment below. I may do, certainly the next one coming up, Volume 6, they've promised will be the Temple of Elemental Evil, which is another adventure that that has a fairly strong place in my gaming history, but I'm not sure when that's actually going to come out yet. It's in the works as far as I know. And other than that, please comment surprise, comment surprise, and don't get stuck on licking lamppost. Oh no, comment, subscribe, and you know, all of that kind of stuff. You lot that watch YouTube quite a lot will know. Probably getting bored of people saying that to you. So yeah, and until the next time, then no, farewell.